Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, I'm going to talk about pruning different types of hydrangeas. The genus Hydrangea has 25 plus species within it, and we've adopted a lot of them as ornamental plants. And so there's some that leaf out in the spring, grow for several weeks, put on flower buds, and then open. Those are ones that bloom on new growth, like this Hydrangea paniculata that I'm standing next to. And then there are the mop head hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, or French hydrangeas, some people call them. Those grow throughout the spring and summer and set flower buds toward the end of summer and carry them through the winter. And on that new growth, that next spring is where the flowers emerge from. So those bloom on old wood or last year's wood. So it's important to know the difference. Kinda. You can actually, any hydrangea that I'm going to show you in this video, you can simply prune after it flowers, and that will eliminate any confusion. If this is confusing at all, prune after flowering, and you'll be fine with any of them. With that said, though, there are a couple of them, Hydrangea paniculata right here, and then Hydrangea arborescens, that actually benefit from some late winter, early spring pruning, where you can really get after them pretty hard. You can create some additional branching. Every new branch is going to lead to a new flower, typically on the paniculatas especially, and that they can be much more showy. Also, my two Hydrangea paniculatas here are in a little more shade than they like to be in, so they're stretching a bit. And so if I continue to let them stretch and stretch and stretch, they're probably going to get a little bit floppy on me. So that's another reason I'm doing a little pruning on these. But we're going to go through several different species that I have in this landscape and show you how I will prune them. I'm going to do some pruning on all of them, even though they'll tell you can't prune, but I'll show you how to do it without damaging any of the buds on the ones that bloom on old growth. This Hydrangea paniculata you can treat like a boxwood, honestly. Paniculatas are going to include limelight, little lime. This one's called white wedding. I've got one out by the front garden called Moon Dance. I've got one that Dr. Durr gave me back here that I'm in the process of tree farming. Hydrangea paniculatas, again, they grow very rapidly in the spring, set flower buds, and then bloom in the summertime. I can cut this thing literally to the ground and it will still bloom this season. That's one of the nice things about Hydrangea paniculatas. They're hardy up to zone 4 because of that. So we just don't have to worry about the upper part of the plant being damaged by cold. We're still going to get flowers on them. And that's one of the reasons they've become so popular. Now, the older varieties can get quite big. We used to grow one called PG at my nursery, several others. They all got 20, 25 feet tall. Limelight gets quite tall. We're seeing them kind of shrink down over the years, and they're really becoming fantastic ornamental plants. Again, this one's called White Wedding. Super compact. Look how upright the flowers are on this one. This one has really thick stems. It establishes very thick stems during the season before the flowers form, and that holds them up big and tall. Most of my other paniculatas that I've had experience with would be, especially here at the beginning of February, would have already definitely flopped over with these flowers on them. So this variety is pretty daggone great. Again, with this one, you can just go down in here and off with its head to whatever height you want to. This one, for me, last year grew about 3 feet before it flowered. I want it to flower about the same height it flowered last year, so I need to take it down about 3 feet. I think it's pretty straightforward math there. I'm going to get the camera a little closer and show you how precise or not precise you can be with these cuts. These had these big, giant white inflorescences on them last summer, and then they fade to this kind of papery look in the wintertime. Again, I'm going to come down here about 3 feet lower and prune it. I want to show you something here. Last year, I made a cut right there, okay? And then you can see, let me let that refocus. You can see where it actually branched out from the side of the branch, okay? Typically, we don't want to leave, folks will tell you that you don't want to leave that kind of cut where it's that far above the bud on the stem. Because then that piece of wood right there is dead and it could be an entryway for disease. I've never had any problem cutting a Hydrangea paniculata and thinking about it. I just come in here and just go off with its head really quickly, which is what I did last year. It still branched out. It hasn't caused this plant any problem. But if you wanted to get in here and be more precise about it, you would find a bud along one of these stems, let's say that one right there, okay? And we would make the cut just above that, okay? Just like that, okay? And we're gonna leave that, it will branch right where that little bud is along the stem, and we don't have to, we won't have all that wood to die back. You don't wanna go any closer to that bud than I just did. So if you wanna be precise about it, you can just come down, again, about 3 feet is how much I need to cut this one down. Some of the larger growing varieties like limelight, you may need to cut it back as much as like 4 feet, because that's about how much it's gonna recover before it flowers. But you can, again, you can go through here with some precision, find a bud along the stem, cut it just above that, make sure your pruners are really sharp. I know that's gonna go out of focus for a second. Let me get that refocus in here. But again, find a bud along the stem, cut it just above it at the height that you want to do. And that's the precise way to cut it. Again, I am not that, I don't have the patience for that. And I'll just go through here and cut the thing 3 feet off really, really quickly. One thing that you can do with this thinner material is you can just cut it into pieces and let it mulch itself. I'm about to mulch this garden, and I go right over top of the leaves with the mulch. And if any perennials, shrubs, anything I'm cutting back, if it's kind of thin like this material is, I'll just cut it into slightly smaller pieces, let it lay right in the bed, and then mulch right over the top of it and let it mulch itself. If the plant was diseased from last year, and we'll talk about that on like Hydrangea macrophylla, those leaves and pieces of branches I probably want to remove from around that plant. But this paniculata, completely clean, and again, I can just use this material to mulch itself. We have a couple native hydrangea species I'll touch on in this video. One is Hydrangea arborescens. I don't have a Hydrangea arborescens in this landscape. I grew one called Annabelle for the entire time that I owned my nursery. These are native to the southeast United States, probably from Missouri all the way back down to Florida. Most of the southeast has Hydrangea arborescens. We've seen with the introduction of Incredible and some of the they've gone from just white, beautiful kind of formal inflorescences to now we see pink and some ruby red colors showing up in these. A lot of breeding going on with Hydrangea arborescens. Hydrangea arborescens is the other one like Hydrangea paniculata that I just showed you that blooms on new wood. And so it will, again, it's going to leaf out in the spring. It's going to grow and grow and grow and pretty quickly form flower buds and bloom on that new wood. Hydrangea arborescens can absolutely be cut almost all the way to the ground if you want to. There's really almost no purpose in leaving the rest of that shrub behind, because it has to get bigger in order to bloom. And so with Hydrangea arborescens, again, like Annabelle, we would just take them and cut them down to about 4 or 5 inches tall in the container every year, and they very quickly recover from that. We just do that in the late winter before they start to wake up. I'm showing you this pruning probably a little bit earlier than I would normally do it, but I like to put these videos up a little in advance. So typically this would be done right about the 1st of March for me, what I'm showing you, and I'm shooting this more toward the beginning of February. But that's Hydrangea paniculata, I showed you at the beginning, Hydrangea arborescens. Those are the two that you can really get after in the wintertime, and there's a ton of new named cultivars. They're also the most cold hardy of the hydrangeas we're talking about, because it doesn't matter if the top of the plant dies, right? If they're new growth, if the flower's on new growth. So Hydrangea arborescens are hardy up to like zone 3. The paniculatas and the arborescens are definitely your friend in the far north. So this species of hydrangea is Hydrangea macrophylla, or the French hydrangea. This one goes by lots of different names, but this is the one that has the very traditional big blue inflorescences on it. They can be pink depending on the soil pH and aluminum availability in the soil. So you'll see these as pink or blue or some shade in between, sometimes almost to the, almost all the way to purple. And of course there are some white macrophyllas as well. These bloom on old wood typically. Again, that means that they put on their flower buds sometime back in the late summer or fall, and they're on here, and as soon as they leaf out and put on a little bit of growth, they're going to show off that inflorescence pretty quickly. Until recently, and now we have ones that are remontant. They bloom on old or new wood. This variety right here is called Dear Dolores, and it is one of the remontant varieties, meaning that even if the flower buds get damaged or cut or whatever, you're still going to get some during the growing season. It just may take a little while longer into summer for it to set new flower buds, but there are lots of new remontant varieties on the market, probably allowing people to grow them a little further north, because these flower buds that are on here through the winter can be cold damaged in severe winters. We haven't had a severe cold winter here, but we had a severe event that dropped the temperature very quickly back in December, and I'm actually wondering if some of the old flower buds on here are damaged. But these are ones typically we're not going to prune during this time of year, except I go in here and clean them up, and I'll give you a close-up of that. But it's very minor kind of neatening up of the plant without taking off those flower buds. This is a pretty small plant, was just planted early last year, but it did a pretty good job of blooming last summer, and these are the spent inflorescences on the top of that. If we go down on the stem, there's just kind of nothing under it until we get to right there. You see that bud along the stem? Right there, that's where the new branch, leaves, and flower bud exist on that stem, and I can cut this just above that to clean it up, and I'll get down in there a little bit lower than that. A lot of folks think you don't, say you don't want to leave that much of a kind of a stump along there, so again, I'll get in there and cut that just a bit closer. It's just hard to hold the camera and do that at the exact same time, but there you go. You don't want to cut it too close to the bud, maybe a ½ inch right there above the bud. Here's another example though, I think from this winter damage. If we look on this one, the inflorescence right there, you see that? Right below it, there's a bud on that stem that I think is kind of dehydrated and dead. Right there, you can, it's hard to get that thing to focus on it. I'm probably gonna go further down on that branch right there. You see, that's definitely a viable bud. It's already starting to think about sending out that branch here, even in early February. It's already fattening up. So again, I'll just go down right above that and cut that off without damaging it. So I think you can see that. So that's all I do on these hydrangea macrophylla. Everybody says don't prune them, but you can take off last year's flowers and just cut them just above that bud along the stem. It's very, very obvious where that bud is. You may also have a piece of the plant that's just riding along the ground and it's gonna get wider than you want it. You can take that entire branch off like I did with this one, but I'll give you a close up here. You can see that the very end of the season growth right up here at the top of this is just kind of dried out, and the first flower bud along the stem is just right there. You can just kind of see it. And so I can go, if this branch, imagine this branch is still on the plant, I can just go back right above that bud that's on the side of that and cut it right there. Didn't make a clean cut. Make sure your pruners are very sharp when you're doing this. But again, even if I wanted to go a little bit lower, there's another bud along the side of that stem. There's another one right there. So again, that's what I'm looking for along the stem. But again, folks will tell you, don't prune these macrophyllas in the winter, but I can just go through here, just go down to where that flower bud is and cut and just clean them up right now. Hydrangea macrophyllas tend to be more susceptible to some leaf spot issues. This one, Hydrangea serrata, that I'll show you just in a minute. These I typically will dispose of. I showed you, I'll just cut that Hydrangea paniculata up and just leave all that mulch in the bed. But typically with these, I'll remove the leaves and the pieces that I'm taking off the plant, just as to not try to spread as little of that disease back onto the new growth as possible. Here's a much larger Hydrangea macrophylla, and again, I can see along these stems where the new growth is going to come from, where those flower buds are going to emerge from. And so I'll just take these old inflorescences and cut, just back to one of those buds. I can, if I wanted to, do a little bit of height control in here because I can see the next set of buds as well. I won't do that. I don't really need to on this plant, but I'll just go through again. I'll clean it up. I'll go through here, pull some of these leaves away from it, try to spread as little of this leaf spot issue back up onto the plant as I can. And there you go. So I've pruned a Hydrangea macrophylla without taking any flower buds off of it, without hurting it at all. It still got them on there. And hopefully the winter hasn't damaged them at all. This one is not remontant. I mean, it's an old-fashioned variety. The flower buds that are on it are the flowers I'm going to have this year, unless they're damaged. That first one I showed you will, even if they got damaged from that cold, still come out and give me some flowers. This one's probably going to be hard to see. This is a Hydrangea serrata, or mountain hydrangea. These have kind of all of a sudden become pretty popular. There's a few new hybrids. This, Tiny Tough Stuff, I think, is one of them. This one is a variegated one. Beautiful, beautiful plant. But these are exactly like those Hydrangea macrophyllas I just showed you. This one will end up 3x3, 4x4 over the years. It's currently so small it doesn't need any kind of pruning on it. But again, I just want to point out that you can see the buds along the stems right there. They're not invisible, right? You can see where we're talking. When we say it blooms on old growth, I can see where the flower buds are and where the new growth for the stems are going to come. And so that inflorescence that's sticking up just above that can be cut off. Okay, this plant's so small, it's completely unnecessary to clean this one up. But in the future, I might want to go through here, just like I just showed you on those macrophyllas, and clean it up in the wintertime, but again, leave those buds along the stem, cut just above them. Our other native hydrangea is Hydrangea quercifolia, or oak leaf hydrangea. These can range in size from, this one right here is a dwarf that, you know, I can maintain somewhere around 3x3, something like that, all the way up to, you know, I've seen them, you know, more than 15 feet in height. And so, you know, variety is important. The particular cultivar you're purchasing is probably fairly important, but there are some dwarf ones. If you ask for those, they probably fit most landscapes a little bit better. These, you know, one other thing to point out on this, in this hydrangea conversation, is those Hydrangea paniculatas, the first one I showed you, will take absolute full sun. Pretty much the rest of what I'm showing you would like at least part shade to shade. The further north you are, probably the more sun they can take. The further south you are, the more shade that they need. But the paniculatas across the board can pretty much take full sun. So this is another oak leaf hydrangeas bloom on old wood, same as the macrophylla, same as the serrata that I just showed you. And that's true with, again, most of them. We're just talking about Hydrangea arborescens, Hydrangea paniculata. Those are the two which you can really almost pretty much cut to the ground during the winter. The rest you can just get in and clean up. So I have the same thing here that I had on the macrophyllas, where I still have the inflorescence on here from last year, and I'll get a little closer to this in a second. Then I can see the buds along the stem where they're going to come from. So yes, it's carrying its flower buds, but I can still take these the flowers off the top of it. And so I'll get in here a little bit closer. I think these have been damaged a bit from that cold snap. I don't know how many flowers I'm actually going to get on this. I'll show you that. This is a very small oak leaf hydrangea. Again, it's a dwarf variety. It's only been in the ground a little over a year though. And you can see this is the, you know, the inflorescence from last year, which was white. And then this one is ruby slippers, kind of fades to a reddish pink, and then ultimately becomes this papery, like typical winter hydrangea look that almost everyone has, you know, at the end of winter. Along that stem, I can see the bud right there, okay? And so again, I can do the exact same thing I did on those macrophyllas. Yes, it blooms on last year's wood, but I can see where that is, and so I'll just cut that off just above it. It looks to me like these buds are actually damaged, and so I don't think I'm gonna get any flowers on this thing this year, maybe one or two, but to me, this plant looks kind of damaged from that cold that we got. Oak leaves are very, very cold hardy, but it just wasn't prepared necessarily for that cold. So I got that inflorescence is there, and just down below it, I don't know if it's gonna focus well, I can see that bud, but the bud looks damaged to me. Holly's gonna get in the video at the last stop. This is that moon dance Hydrangea paniculata that I talked about in the back garden. I really, really like this variety. Look at the height that it bloomed. This is the second year in the ground. It's extremely compact, really sturdy stems. Look how upright they are, even at this time in February. And again, you know, no matter what's been thrown at them, rain or wind or whatever, they've managed to stay very upright. I'll bring this a little closer, and you can really see how sturdy that thing actually is. I mean, I really like this variety. I think the Southern Living Plant Collection has really promoted white wedding quite a bit, and it's a great plant. You saw it in the back, also holding its flowers up big and tall. But I think this moon dance is really, this thing's fantastic. I'm going to let them know that second year in the ground. I think look how compact it is and how vigorous it was at the same time. So we got Hydrangea paniculata and Hydrangea arborescens. You can basically cut down to the ground. The rest of them you can just simply clean up or leave them alone. That's completely and totally up to you. There are two species of climbing hydrangea. The most common one is petiolaris. Those are just, if you need to cut them just to get some control under them, you can, but typically they just don't really need any pruning unless there's a dead branch, dead limb. Those are just typically looking at them, analyzing if it's getting too big, taking some of that growth back, and you can do that in the late winter, early spring. You will be removing some flowers. You don't want to do any general pruning on it, but typically those are just winter cleanup jobs on the climbing hydrangeas, and then the others, the macrophyllas and others are cleanup jobs as well, and the paniculatas and arborescens are get after them pretty hard, which is what I'm doing right here. But and so again, I want to reiterate that if you prune these things after flowering, you don't have to think about anything I just said in this video. But I like to do this late winter pruning on these arborescens and paniculatas just because I get a much fuller, bunchier plant, and it blooms at the height that I want it to bloom at. This thing will grow about 3 feet before it blooms, and that'll be sticking just above this fence when it does, and I'll take off any wider limbs at the same time. And you might want to do that on any of your hydrangeas. If you got a crazy limb, take it off. No point in keeping it on if it's eventually going to come off. Okay, there you go. Cleaned up and ready to go. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for following along. Again, prune after flowering, and you don't have to worry about this. But if you can remember, your paniculatas and arborescens can be cut back very hard in the winter, and the rest of them just simply cleaned up, neatened up, and make sure you're not cutting down below those flower buds. You're good to go. Thanks for watching.